I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. What's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like, imixwhatilike.org, at I Mix What I Like for all your relevant social media. Again, I'm Jared Ball, happy to host this, what I think is another very important conversation, this time with the political and social editor of Atlanta Black Star, also organizer, attorney, writer, longtime veteran of all sort of political formations, Kamau Franklin, who now joins us from down there in Atlanta. So welcome back to the program, Kamau. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you, brother. Thanks for having me on.
So I wanted to talk with you as someone who has a certain, again, long-time political experience, activist experience, someone involved with a lot of different radical grassroots formations. What does this election, or I should say the primary victory in Jackson, Mississippi, at the mayoral race of Chokwe Antar Lumumba, what does this mean? What does it mean in terms of electoral politics, grassroots struggle, the legacy of his father, Chokwe? Let's just start with that broad question, if you would.
Well, I think it's a tremendous victory, actually, for grassroots organizing, for shifting some aspect of electoral struggle. I think Antar stepping in and taking up the mantle of his father, particularly with the engines of Cooperation Jackson and other formations in Jackson, Mississippi, helping him and his own team behind him, helping him. It could mean a lot for that model that a lot of times we talk about that needs to be created, that shows what grassroots folks, what radical folks can do when they hold power, when they have access to a budget. It also can show what the limitations are of someone in an electoral position around what they can accomplish, particularly with a hostile state that's ready to probably pounce and limit their authority. So I think it's going to be a good test. I think there'll be some good things that probably come out of it. I think there'll be some things that they have to be careful about in terms of trying to move forward with their agenda.
You had lived in Jackson. Again, you've had experience not only in that community, but with these kinds of politics. What can you tell us about the specifics of Jackson, Mississippi that both made this effort possible, but then also offers up some of those challenges that you just mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about Jackson, which was a very specific place and time when the idea, when I was with the Malcolm X crisis movement, when the idea came that we should focus national efforts on Jackson, Mississippi. And a lot of those things that mattered was the fact that Jackson was a city that was over 80% Black. It was a relatively small city of about 180,000 people. And it had, demographically speaking, the largest percentage of Black folks who lived in a state, upwards of 45%, depending on who you ask. So the history of Jackson in terms of the civil rights movement also mattered. And Chokwe Lumumba at the time, his prominence as the attorney who's known to take bold, radical action, his organizing history, the history of other formations in Jackson, it made it the place that seemed the most likely to be able to run a candidate who was radical, run a candidate who had identified with certain politics, and someone, again, who'd been there for a long time, so people knew him. People knew him both as an activist attorney and as an organizer, and just as a good human being. So he was somebody who was well-respected and well-placed. So I think some of those things bode well, and still obviously bode well for pushing through a certain politics beyond being either scapegoated in some ways or people marginalizing. I think the fact that that family has a history there helps support what just happened. I think some of the things that folks in Jackson have to think about again is that Jackson is a very conservative white supremacist state still, and that the leadership in Jackson, obviously at the state level, are right-wing Republicans who don't want to see, it's almost like being Cuba, right? They don't want to see a demonstrative model that supports cooperatives, that supports left-thinking, left-leaning socialism in a sense. They don't want to see something like that work. And so they're going to do what they can to limit the ability of any kind of project to continue working right under their nose. And so I think that's one of the major things that they have to worry about. I think also, even though I think Jackson is a pretty politicized city in terms of people knowing the history of white supremacy, I think the organizational apparatuses in Jackson, the radical formations, have to grow, and they have to grow by recruiting people from Jackson, and not just, although I think it's a good add-on, but having people come down to Jackson is good, and it helps support the struggle. But ultimately, they have to recruit from the indigenous folks in Jackson to not only vote electorally speaking, but to participate in some of the organizing efforts that they have at hand. And that was something that even at the time when I was down there, was always a little bit lacking in terms of the amount of participation in some of these direct efforts. So I think those are going to be some of the things that folks are going to have to think about and try to figure out as they enter this new stage where actually city government, actually millions of dollars are in some ways under the auspices of a radical left leaning mayorship.
You know, if what I saw from the campaign, Chokwe Antar Lumumba was clear. You know, obviously he is his father's son. He comes out of that movement, but he was also trying to be clear that this was not him just running on his father's name, and was looking to extend some of those politics and platform. Is there more than what you've already said that could help flesh out for us what that platform is and what this mayoral campaign is offering that is different from even seemingly progressive efforts in other parts of the country?
I think the biggest thing that what leads me to believe that this could be different, and maybe the closest that it comes to currently in the country is Newark under Ras Baraka, where there's going to be this mixture, right? Because forces are not strong enough to do something solidly left, in my opinion. But there's going to be this mixture of trying to do cooperative enterprises in some ways with the city's assistance now, trying to do more fair housing with the city's assistance now, trying to do things around minimum wage. So I think it's going to be in helping to support unionization, at least at that local level. So I think there are things like that that will specifically be worked on that will be, I'm going to say, left of center in terms of the politics and the actions. I think there's also going to be mainstream stuff that that may or may not help support a radical struggle, but it's sort of the auspices of the office, and that's going to be development by developers. And so the question becomes whether or not these developers who've been there for decades either feel like they can work with this administration or plot to, again, throw ISO on this administration. And it's going to be up to Antar and those around him to see what that delicate balance is. And as they gain strength, they may push those developers out the way. If they feel like they can't gain strength, then we'll see how they either get dealt with or deal with those who are down there. So I think all of that's in play in terms of what's going to happen. I think Antar has a strong base. And from what I know about Antar, you know, it's been a few years since I've probably spoken to him. He's obviously committed to the similar politics of his father's. I think there are going to be some overlapping similarities. And I think he, just like anybody else who's in that position, will have to worry if other people try to move him away from his base and tell him that, you know, if you want to get along, these are the things that you have to do. And I think it's going to be up to that base to say, Antar, you got elected on these values, on these principles, and you need to move this way as opposed to going the other way. So I think I say that to say, I think it's going to be a challenge. I think there's going to be some potential good outcomes, but still, remember, we're trying to create a model, or they're trying to create a model in the Deep South, surrounded by sort of a hostile state apparatus. And that's going to be something that's going to have to be taken into account.
You sort of touched on this at the beginning, but I do want to kind of double back again and ask, you know, for those, you know, a lot of us have been critical of electoral politics, broadly speaking. A lot of us are critical of working within the Democratic Party. You know, I've advocated the Green Party or some other formation at other points in time. But years ago, getting a chance to having one serious conversation with Chokwe's father, Chokwe, he laid it out brilliantly why this particular effort could work within this Democratic Party structure. So I'm kind of wondering how you see this as other people. You know, there are these efforts in Ferguson we're learning about where activists are running. Obviously, we know some of the history of Black liberation struggles moving into electoral politics, often within the Democratic Party. I'm just, you know, what do you think that this means? Similarities, differences? Do you think this should be a broader advocacy for working within that Democratic Party with these politics? Or is it just specific to Jackson that this could work, or other similar situations? What would you add to that?
I think every situation is going to be a little different, to be honest. I think Jackson, again, because of that history, because of the Black percentage, because of the Black control locally of the Democratic Party. So for this particular instance, it made sense that from Chokwe down to his son, that there was a victory at hand. Now, what happens with that victory within the Democratic Party, locally, again speaking, one of the plans before under Chokwe Sr. was to slightly move away from the Democratic Party once in office and try to create and or join a Democratic club that could be built out of something that had its own apparatus, built its own institutions, had its own email list, and something that could work outside of the local Democratic Party. But it seemed to make sense at the time because of what we were speaking about in terms of numbers and ability to start there. And I think, and even within the organization at the time, there was great debate around that. But I think it all matters around what people can do within the frameworks in which they have. But there's going to be other places that are going to be mostly Black in terms of Black politics, whereas the leadership in the Democratic Party is going to be so committed to a moderate position that having someone left who is able to infiltrate or to come in and shift those politics, even if they have a relationship with the larger community, is going to be far more difficult. And so the smarter thing to do in that situation may be to build from the ground up. There's some other fellow activists who worked in Selma, Alabama for a few years, Cliff Albright and April Albright, and they created the Freedom Party. Which nearly, after sort of a culmination of organizing, nearly got enough votes in one election to permanently get on the ballot of the Selma, Alabama party line. So there's other ways that people can take it. There's the Green Party, but I think it's all about what's at hand, what's possible, what people think their forces can actually build. I mean, one of the critiques, I think, of the Green Party is that there's a lot of attention built around the national election, but you don't necessarily see that, at least, for those who are outside observers, locally speaking. And so if some of those resources that the Green Party may use for national elections was actually put into some places that seem strategic locally, then that may also be a way to build outside of the Democratic Party, keep a solid grassroots radical formation going without having to depend on whatever apparatus has already been already put together or anything. That may take more time, of course, but it may be sometimes more important to take more time than to go for a quicker victory.
So in the few minutes we have left, I know obviously Chokwe Antar Lumumba ran on his own strength and his own effort here, but I can't not ask you a little bit about his father, having all the experience you had with him in that movement. What would you say just briefly about Chokwe Sr., Chokwe Lumumba Sr.?
I think Chokwe provided a great image and a great position for all of us to follow in terms of what leadership should look like. I think Chokwe dedicated his life to Black liberation. I think that's obvious for anybody who knows Chokwe. And I think he did it in different venues in different ways, but he continued to do it. He combined, again, his legal genius, his organizing skills. He built organizations more specifically. He didn't just have a very general politic and decided to operate under that. He had very specific politic. He didn't depend on foundations for the most part to drive his work. He drove his work based on what he was able to gather through organizing efforts. So I think Chokwe provides a great model, ideologically speaking, and provides a great model around what's the institutions that we have to build in order to challenge this larger system. So I think, and it's obvious through the work that he did in Jackson and what happened when he won that election. Like, I was his campaign manager for the first 6 months of his mayoral campaign, and then I left. But Chokwe didn't need me, right? Chokwe didn't need, to be honest, because of the relationship he built with the people. The organization probably wasn't as strong as it needed to be, but because of the relationship he built over decades in Jackson, he was able to show what the fruition of that work could be in different ways, electorally speaking, grassroots organizing speaking, and being a great people's movement lawyer speaking. So I think, we can give Antar a lot of credit for what he did, but it's obvious like that movement is still built on the work of Chokwe Lumumba.
Well, Kamau Franklin, I thank you again for joining us for this quick catch-up. I appreciate that, and continued success as the social political editor of Atlanta Black Star, AtlantaBlackStar.com, and also you blog at grassrootsthinking.org as well. So thank you very much for joining us, and appreciate the time.
Thank you, brother. Thank you for having me. You take care.
And as always, to the rest of you, we say peace if you're willing to fight for it, as did Fred Hampton, and we'll catch you in the whirlwind. Thanks again for joining us. Peace, everybody. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.